We're rolling.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, are you seeing the slide for PubMed Essentials right now?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so hello everybody, my name is Rebecca Morgan. I'm one of the Medical Center Library librarians, and I'm going to walk you through PubMed Essentials today. And this is going to be mainly a review of how to build a search in a database. It's going to be catered to PubMed, but it's going to talk a lot about using Boolean operators and how to actually do a precise search in a database to look for literature. So I did want to point out, because you've probably seen this if you've watched our tips and tricks video, but we have a new website. So the way you access PubMed has actually changed. So I did want to point this out. Please make sure that you bookmark the new site. It has changed where the research guides are, where the links to databases and so forth are. So just be aware of that. And I will show you later when we actually go into PubMed how to access it. But just the caveat, we have a new website. All right, so today we are going to talk about PubMed Medline, and it is the largest biomedical database in the world. There are I think they're up to like 28 million citations, something like that in it. It's important to remember that PubMed is actually the interface. If you see it ever written as PubMed Medline, that's because Medline is actually the database that is being searched. And there's many ways to search it. You can search it using Ovid, you can search it using EBSCO, you can search it using ProQuest. All of those are via subscriptions. The PubMed interface is provided for free by the government, and it is the most largely used interface of pretty much any. It's also much more user-friendly. And the important thing to remember is no matter what type of health sciences you're in, no matter where you go into practice, if you're eventually in a place that doesn't have subscriptions to databases, you will always be able to search PubMed because it is a free biomedical database. So it's important to know how to use it simply for that matter. However, even though it is free, because you are in UK, you need to go through the library website or one of our research guides to actually log into or connect from our servers into PubMed to make sure that you have access to our catalog. So while the interface itself is searchable and you can look up all the citations, unless if you go through the UK website, it's not going to know that you are a UK student, faculty member, staff member, so forth, and you're not going to get that full text access. So as long as you're affiliated with UK, make sure that you are going through our website or one of our many research guides and pages that have a link to it. So within PubMed, there are two ways to search. There's the basic search and there's the advanced search. The basic search is called automatic term mapping. And when we go into PubMed, you'll see that you open it, there's a search box, you just put in your terms there like Google. That is the basic search. It is not the best way to search if you are doing any kind of research project or if you are actually looking to do a thorough literature review of any sort. So if you just have a clinical question and you want to go in and just find like the latest information, you can go in and you can do a basic search, and it uses a search algorithm called automatic term mapping, where it's a learning search algorithm. So the more people, like, it learns based on what you select after you do a search. So that means it's always changeable. That's why it's not great for research. It's like I said, it's fine for quick looks, but you really want to do the advanced search if you're going to be doing anything research-based, anything for school projects, anything for a lit review, anything that's more intensive, because the advanced search is not learnable. It's reproducible. So if you go in and build a search in the advanced search builder, and we will show that later in this demonstration, then you will be able to reproduce it over and over and over again and know exactly what you're getting, because the search algorithm isn't going to learn or change or do anything differently. When you do an advanced search, you want to use a combination of natural and controlled vocabulary, and we will talk about that a little bit later. But basically, there are specific terms used by PubMed that highlight concepts. They're called mesh terms. We'll get into that in just a second. And then your own terms that you come up with. So you're building more complex searches where you're linking different terms together, multiple synonyms, things like that. That is what we're going to mainly focus on today, this advanced search. Before you do any searching though, you need to have a plan. It will save you so much more time if you don't just blindly go into a search and just say, oh, well, I'm going to see what's out there. If you have a topic that you're looking for, you need to actually have it laid out in your brain what you're going to do. You need to have some identified keywords, and you need to have, some basic groundwork that will make the process of building a search and moving forward so much easier. So there are three basic steps to this process. First, you identify your keywords. Second, you identify your mesh terms or your controlled vocabulary terms that I mentioned just a second ago. And in step 3, you combine those terms using what we call Boolean operators. So let's go through this step by step. So first step, identify keywords. As I said, you always want to start by phrasing your topic in a single question or a sentence as best as possible, because then you're going to be able to just kind of pop your keywords out of it. So in this very simple research question, does a low-fat diet reduce the instance of heart attack? The instance of people with heart disease experiencing a heart attack, I'm sorry. If you can phrase this, then you're able to just instantly kind of see and know what the keywords for each topic that you're going to have to pull up, and that's going to be the foundation of your search. So to demonstrate that, there are 3 major subject keywords or phrases within the sentence: low-fat diet, heart disease, and heart attack. You may have heard of PICO in the past, which is a framework that allows you to identify all the different pieces that you need to create a search. I'm not going to go into that. Some of our other databases will go into that. That's a way of creating and making sure that you have all the points that you need in a search. But for the purposes of demonstration, I'm just going to do this simple, relatively simple question that has just 3 keywords, and we're going to learn how to build a search based off this. So if you're interested in PICO, P-I-C-O, then we have that included in some of our other videos in this research workshop series, and you can look it up there. So step 2, let's talk about mesh terms, which I've alluded to several times already. So mesh terms stands for medical subject headings. You can see that it's, an acronym taken out of the term medical subject headings. As I said, this is something called controlled vocabulary. It'll make more sense when I actually show you it in the mesh database, but the purpose of controlled vocabulary is to standardize phrasing and language for each concept. So you have terms that in context seem straightforward, but they're really not if you're thinking about it just in black and white. For example, nursing can mean both breastfeeding, and it can also mean the profession of nursing. So if you just search for nursing, it can theoretically be confusing for a search algorithm that doesn't understand the context. But if you create a controlled vocabulary that stamps these concepts as like, oh, nursing can also mean breastfeeding, or it can mean the profession, and you use those controlled vocabulary in your search, then you will eliminate the confusion. It also allows you to deal with different spellings of terms, like in anglicized or English, from England language, there's often a U added in terms like color and behavior versus the Americanized version of the terms. So again, controlled vocabulary will allow you to search those different spellings without having to spell them out individually. It will do it for you, because this higher concept will be stamped over all the different ways that it could possibly be spelled or phrased. So these terms, these controlled vocabulary terms, all exist in a dictionary that is within PubMed, and all these terms, these mesh terms, are stamped onto articles. So you can search using mesh terms, and even if I have an article about using soap and water on my hands to prevent COVID and never use the word hand disinfection or hand washing, someone will go through and stamp it hand disinfection. So if I search for that mesh term, it'll still come up, even if that phrase is not used. So it's very important to know how to use mesh terms and to always include them in your searches whenever possible. And I will go here in just a second, but just to demonstrate, if you go into PubMed, here's the front page, here's that basic search bar I talked about. And then here on the bottom right, excuse me, where it says Explore, you have the mesh database. So remember that mesh is a dictionary or a database of phrases. PubMed is a database of citations. So you have to search the mesh database for the phrases before you can search for the citations in PubMed. Okay, so in step 2, now that we've talked about what mesh terms are, we have to actually go and find them. So what you should do is, now that you've identified your keywords, in step 1, you need to go and actually find the mesh equivalent for each of the terms. So in our case, we have low-fat diet, we have heart failure, and we have heart attack. It's always good to remember that there can possibly be multiple mesh terms that might be useful. So don't always just find one and think you're done. You know, if it's a concept that's kind of abstract, do some more searching and see if there's possibly multiple ones that could be useful. And also very possible that if it's too specific a topic, there might not actually be a mesh term for it. So you have to kind of think about that too. So let's actually go into, let's actually go into mesh really quickly, the database. And it is not letting me leave presentation. Sorry, there we go. And can you now see can someone just tell me, can you see the UK Libraries Medical Center library page?
Yes.
You can.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So this is the MCL library main page. Here's the URL up here. You can also just Google UKYMCL, and this is the first result you'll get in Google, and just bookmark it. That's probably the easiest thing to do. I'm going to go into Health Sciences Databases here under Top Resources. Scroll down, and here's my link to PubMed. And because I'm on UK campus right now, it's not going to require me to do any kind of login, anything like that. Should you be at home or off campus working on this, it will prompt you to log in with your link blue. So just keep that in mind. So as I showed you in the earlier slide, down here under Explore is where the mesh database lives. So I'm going to open that. And can everybody see the mesh database? Just making sure.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Caleb. So I'm going to go through and I'm now going to search for our different topics. So low-fat diet was what was the first phrase, the first keyword that we were looking for. So let's put in low-fat diet. And you can see that it immediately took me to the mesh term for diet fat restricted. So that's a different phrasing than I had initially typed in, but it still recognized it. There's a few things in the mesh database that I want you to notice immediately. First, there is this scope note that describes the actual definition of when the term was, what the term means. Always good to read it, because something that might seem very straightforward might have a much more specific, much more narrow, or even a more expansive definition than you intend it to have. So always read the scope note, especially if it's a more abstract topic, and you're not like a distinct disease or something like that. If it's something more abstract, like ethnicity or race, something that's a little harder to define directly, make sure you read the scope note so you know exactly what you're looking at. Also notice that the year introduced is 1995. PubMed goes way back before 1995. So you have to remember that this mesh term is only going to start being indexed on terms or on citations starting in 1995. So what about all that literature before 1995? Well, that's important. That's why it's always important to search mesh terms, but not just mesh terms. That's why you always want to put in your own way of phrasing so it searches both. So it does the most complex search possible. So let's stick to mesh right now, but just keep in mind, you always want to search synonyms, and we'll get to that in the next step. Below the scope note is a bunch of subheadings. So if you are interested in trends in low-fat diets or the history of or adverse effects of a low-fat diet, you can click the subheading and it will restrict only to that. I don't recommend doing that unless it's a very, very, very clear reason to do it. In this case, I don't see any reason that I would want to link to it for our question, but just be aware that they are there. And then below we have these things called entry terms. What these are all the different things that are linked to this mesh term. So if I search for this mesh term, if I include diet, comma, fat restricted in my search with a mesh tag attached to it, and I'll show you how to get that in just a second, it will also be searching all these different phrases at once. So it's a very powerful search. It's searching for a lot of things. Keep going down, and you'll notice that mesh terms are all arranged in a tree. They're all linked to each other. They're not just, distinct terms that are out on their own in a dictionary. They're actually all linked together. So I have diet fat restricted, and then above that I have diet therapy, and then I have nutritional therapy, or even on this other branch, I have diet fat restricted right under diet. So it's important to remember that there might be other things you might want to go a step up, or sometimes, and we'll see this in a second, you'll go into another one and there'll be a ton below it. So you have to be aware of where your term falls in the tree of mesh and get a sense of what you're looking for. So this looks pretty good. We are looking for a fat restricted diet, but just keep in mind that if I click on diet and I scroll down to the tree, suddenly there are all these different types of diets. So maybe you want to consider another one in addition to a low-fat diet, or you want to do a comparison between a protein restricted diet and a low-fat diet, something like that. This is a good way to find other terms potentially to look for in your search. But for this case, we want to do fat restricted. And so the way that you find your mesh term, the way it needs to be phrased, because when you're doing an advanced search, all the parentheses, all the quotation marks, all the block quotes, everything that you link to, it's like very low level coding, have to be precise and perfect. So if you go over to this PubMed search builder and hit add to search builder, then this is exactly how your mesh term needs to be written out when you do your search. So I highly recommend just keeping a Word document or something open while you're doing this and just copy and paste this into your search or into your document, and then you'll be able to build the search at the end after you identify all your mesh terms. It's just the easiest way to keep track of stuff. So let's just look at another one really quickly. I'm going to look up heart diseases because that was another one of our phrases. So now you can see that it actually came up with a bunch of different terms. So I have to actually go in and collect heart diseases because there are enough other things that it thought might be relevant to this. And this time when I go into heart diseases, suddenly you realize that there are a whole lot of heart diseases. So this might be way too broad a term for me to use for my search, because if I search for heart diseases as a mesh term, it's going to search for every single one of these subheadings below it. And if you see a little plus next to it, then there's even subheadings below that. So this is fairly high up in a tree. So I might want to consider, am I actually looking for all these heart diseases? Like, am I looking for aneurysms? Am I looking for ruptures? Am I looking for, heart cancers, heart neoplasms? Or am I really just looking for heart failure? In this case, I'm going to say I'm actually interested in just looking at heart failure. So I'm going to click on that instead. And that's a much smaller tree. So it's still broad. It's still a topic that will have some subtopics, but it's not going to be quite the insane expansive search with all those heart diseases. Now it's up to you. If you really, for the purpose of your search, want to see absolutely everything that's under that, then absolutely search heart diseases. But you always want to consider, is there a possible way that I can narrow it down to make it a more refined search? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to add this to the search builder. And that is exactly what I'm going to want to put in my search as I build it. So what we've done so far is we've identified keywords, and then let's just say I've done the same thing for heart attack. Actually, I will show heart attack really quickly, simply to show you that if I search for heart attack, it's a completely different phrase. Most people know that heart attacks are also called myocardial infarctions, but you have to be aware that in order to do the true full search, that you want to do the mesh term search for myocardial infarction, and then you also want to search for the phrase heart attack in natural language. So it's that mix of controlled vocabulary and natural language searched together that will really make sure that you're covering the subject as thoroughly as possible. So as I was saying before, we've gone through, we've identified our keywords, and we've identified mesh terms that match them. I'm keeping them off in a document off to the side that doesn't really show up in this video. But just remember, really super helpful if you have a working Word document as you're going through to track what you're doing. Even in a fairly simple search, it just makes the copying and pasting that much easier. So let's go back to our, sorry, this thing is always in the way that is showing you how to, there we go. It's dropping down to record with. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. So now we have to actually go through and combine our terms together now that we have our mesh terms and our natural language terms. And we use this doing what we call Boolean operators. And they are and, or, and not. So starting here on the left, if we use and, we are narrowing our search. And is combining two different terms together and finding what is in the center where the overlap is. So if I search for low-fat diet and heart attack, I'm only going to get this middle section right here. The opposite of that is or, and or is an expander. So if I look for, let's say, two different types of diets, a low-fat diet or a vegetarian diet, I'm going to get absolutely everything under both of them, including where they overlap. So it's much broader, where and narrowed and really refined the search, or expands it widely into, saying this or that and everything about both of them. The last one is not. And what you're saying, it's always harder to illustrate, because what it's saying is if you say a low-fat diet but not a vegetarian diet, then it's only going to show the low-fat diet. So it's actually only going to take this kind of crescent moon shape out. So anything that overlaps or anything with the vegetarian diet, it's going to cut out. So I really, really, really want to caution everybody to not use not. It is something that even librarians only use very rarely, because you end up restricting a lot out you don't intend to. So let's say that there's articles on low-fat diets, including vegetarian diets, but it still has all this relevant information that you want on low-fat diets, and just happens to mention vegetarian diets. If you say not vegetarian diets, that article will probably be excluded, because you're saying, I don't want anything to do with vegetarian diets at all. So you can end up really narrowing and restricting out stuff that you actually want to see that might have crossover. So unless if it's something that is absolutely certain that you want absolutely nothing of, then I guess you can use not. But again, I highly, highly caution you against it. And as a result, I am only going to go over combining things in and or in PubMed and in searching in general, because that should be all that you're using on a regular basis. So when you're doing a search, you always start with or. And again, just a little remember, or always equals more. So what that means is that you're using or to combine your like terms, your terms that match, your synonyms, your mesh term, and then your natural language term that goes with it, or any other synonyms that you can think of. So in this case, you can see I have my mesh term first, or a low-fat diet, and I will get to this little asterisk in a second, or a fat-free diet. So these are two different ways to describe fat-restricted. Fat-free is a little more strict. So, I mean, yes, but it is an alternative that, you could conceivably want to consider as a synonym. When you are entering stuff into PubMed, as I said, punctuation and tags like this little mesh tag and everything are all very critical for it to understand what you're saying. It is like very basic low-level coding. So when you are using phrases that are more than one word, you want to put quotes around them. So fat-free diet, quotes around it. If I just had diet by itself, I wouldn't need to have quotes. But because these are multi-word phrases, we have to put quotes around it. You always, I really highly recommend using the mesh database and adding the mesh term to that little search builder like I showed on the right side and copying and pasting that directly. Because if you do like diet without the comma fat restricted, it might not recognize it properly. If you just put low fat diet with mesh next to it, it definitely won't. So you really want to copy and paste it exactly how the mesh dictionary is telling you to do it. And then finally, this little asterisk here, that's what we call truncation. So what it does is it's saying in the search that I'm searching for low fat diet, low fat diets with an S added, low fat dieting. It's adding characters, potential characters. It's either saying 0 to, I can't remember exactly how many it is, but it looks for any different phrasings that are words that extend past what you have as the trunk. So it's looking for diet, diets, dieting, and so forth. Dietary, I guess, any kind of iterations of that word. It's important to remember that you need to have at least 3 letters prior to using truncation. It's also really important to know that it will look for endless versions. I think there's like maybe 600 or 6,000. I can't remember exactly how many it is, but it's a lot. And so you don't want to just do like TOX and then asterisk because you're going to get like an insane number of stuff. You don't want to do just like CHEM and asterisks. You really have to make sure that it's going to be a reasonable and sensible extensions, or reasonable and sensible extensions that it's going to be searching for when you put it next to it. So diet, there's not an insane amount of terms that could come after it, so I feel comfortable putting truncation here. And so I've created an OR string for my first keyword with the mesh term with 2 different synonyms. They're all linked with OR, and I've made sure my punctuation is in mind. After you do that for each of your phrases, you go through and you combine them all with and. So you can see my first keyword, the one we just saw, with diet. And then we're combining it, this OR string, and myocardial infarction, our mesh term, or heart attack, and then this is important, it's often good to write this out as the mesh term out as natural language. Why? That seems kind of odd. It's going to search the same exact thing. It's the same words, right? Well, mesh terms, because someone has to actually go through and read them and then stamp them with all the literature that's coming out, that means that they're, in this case, years behind. So if you're truly going to get everything covered, you should search for the terms as both a mesh term and a non-mesh term. Diet, comma, fat restricted is awfully clunky. I don't think it would be written this way in an article, so I didn't do it for here. But myocardial infarction, it made sense to do it. And then heart failure. And honestly, I should have had heart failure here as a second OR with, in natural language. That's a mistake on my part. But the point is that we've gone through and then we've combined all our OR strings with and then at the end of that, you will get your results. So let's actually stop talking about this theoretically and let's actually go into PubMed. And take a look at what it's like. Okay, so back to PubMed. Here's our basic search where you do automatic search, the basic search, the automatic term mapping search that I said what you don't do for literature searching or research. And then excuse me, right below it is a link for the advanced search. And no matter where you find the search bar, so even if I do a search, you will always be able to find this advanced link underneath it on any page in PubMed. So just keep that in mind. So if I click on it, what it's going to do is it's going to take me to PubMed's advanced search builder. And this is where you are going to combine everything with and or, and it's going to do it for you, and it's going to add much of the punctuation and tags and phrasing that you want to include. So let's start with, let's go back to our low-fat diet. And again, I'm in the mesh database. I'm going to add it to search builder, copy it right out, and I'm going to add it to my PubMed search box. And I want you to look at this box right here in the query. It defaults to all fields, but when I paste it in, then it grays out because it understands that this mesh tag is here. So you don't have to do anything. It's written exactly how you want it. All you have to do is click add, and it goes into your query box. The next thing, now we have to do a couple things to prepare it before we can take the next step and add our next or thing to create that long or string. First, always make sure it defaults to and. Always make sure at this point you switch it to add with or. I cannot tell you, Matt, how many times I've done really complex searches and I forgot to switch that and I wondered, why am I getting no results? It's because and is your narrower. So if you're saying and this and something that's similar, then you're going to like limit yourself down to 0 or 2 results. So you want or. At this point, we want to expand out and get as many articles we can possibly find on our topic of fat restricted diet. So we always need to make sure that we switch this to or. The next thing you need to do is in this box with all fields, I highly recommend that you drop down and you go to title and abstract or title, but in some way that you take it off all fields. And I do recommend title abstract is a good thorough way to search it. And use this as your next tag. The reason this is important is because there are so many variations that you wouldn't even think of. Like you think, oh, I'm doing a keyword search. But if you're familiar with the neonatal intensive care unit, which is called the NICU, NICU, if you search for the acronym NICU, there are a whole lot of authors with the last name NICU. And you end up pulling in all of those that you did not mean to pull in if you don't limit it to title abstract, because it'll search all the author fields. If you search for something involving chest, heart, there might be a journal called Heart Attack or Heart Failure. So if you search for those phrases and you don't limit it to title abstract, again, you're going to pull in all this stuff that you don't necessarily mean to. But if you limit it to title abstract, it should actually be title abstract keyword because it will also search author keywords. Then you are limiting it to really just keyword phrasing. So change your query box here, your field tag to title abstract. And then remember, put quotes around multi-phrase or multi-word phrases. So I'm going to say low fat diet. I'm going to add my asterisk. I'm going to close the quotes. So low fat diet in quotes with the asterisk next to it for truncation. So it's searching for low fat diets, low fat dieting, things of that nature. And I'm going to hit or. If there's other synonyms that you want to include, like I included fat-free diet in my demonstration in my slide, this is when you add them. You want to link them together with or. And as a professional librarian, there's oftentimes that, in a really systematic review search, we will have massive strings of like 30 terms. So they can get really long. But for the purposes of this demonstration, let's just use these two, your mesh term and then a natural language term. I can go right to search and it'll take me to the results just of this, but there's this little caret here. I'm going to have that drop down and I'm just going to select add to history. So down here in the history and search details, the search that I just put together appears and you can see that there are 7,778 articles on fat restricted diets. So that's not bad. At this point, when you're just putting your ors together, you want this to be a high number. 7,000 is actually lower than I thought it would be. I mean, if you get 10,000, you get, in the 20s and the 30s, that's actually good at this point. Because when you put those ands together and you limit it together, then it's really going to shrink your results down more than you necessarily would realize. So getting a high number right now That's what we want. So now I'm not going to do all three of them. Let's just search for heart attack. Again, I'm back in the mesh database, so I can get my mesh term. So I'm going to add, it always leaves the history in there. That's why I have to keep deleting over here. So I'm going to go and I'm going to add to search builder, and I have my myocardial infarction tag with the mesh tag next to it. I'm going to copy this. And even if this is left at title and abstract, if I paste in with a mesh term, it doesn't matter. It's going to gray that out and it's going to recognize that it's a mesh term. So I can just copy it, paste it, add it in, and then it'll just revert back to title and abstract. But you can see that the mesh term did not change. It didn't add this title and abstract one that it did in my lower one. So now it stayed at or, it stayed at title and abstract. Now I can put in heart attack, and I am going to add the asterisk, so it'll also search for heart attacks. Close the quotes because it is a multi-word phrase. Hit enter or click on or, and it adds it. And then I am also going to add myocardial infarction as natural language term. Again, hit or, and now I have these three terms linked together in an or string, and I'm going to add them to history. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do it for heart diseases or heart failure, which is what we also talked about earlier. Just going to use these two to demonstrate it. So now I have my two or strings at the bottom. I have the one with almost 8,000 and the one with just over 275,000. So this is a good number of results. It doesn't matter which one you start with, but then to connect these strings with and together, you go to these three dots, this little ellipsis that's under actions in our search history. So if I click this, I'm going to add it back into the search query. I go to the second one, the one I haven't added, and I click on the little ellipsis. And now you can see that it gives me my Boolean operators. So I'm going to add with and. And if you look in the search box, the reason it's important to do it this way is that it puts all the correct parentheses around it. Actually, I mean, it probably adds more parentheses that are necessary, but it still does it for you so you don't run the risk of missing one and not closing it properly and throwing off your whole search. So it's important to build it properly in this advanced search builder, step by step, and build your or strings and then add them using these actions below. So it does some of the coding for you. It does the parentheses for you, and that's a big step. So now that I've combined these together, I'm ready to do my search. So I can either add it to history, I'll do that. There's 119, or I can do my actual search. So I'm going to click on this, get to my results, and let's now look at the results page for PubMed now that we've combined and run our search. As you can see here, the results actually go back to 1973 and all the way up to 2022. So you can use the slider and limit it and just do like the last 22 years from 2000 to 22. You can do it even just to the last year, however you want it. This is just kind of a cool little tool. You can also go down and limit to a year, 5 years, 10 years, or a custom range. If you are truly doing a refined search, I do want to point out, I'm going to go back into the search results for this, and you do that by just clicking advanced again. And here are all the searches we did. So I'm just going to add this back into the query so I can show you something. You can go to the drop down and you can limit by publication date this way. So if you want to be really narrow, like I'm only looking for stuff between like January 2022 and March 2022, you can do it by publication date or one of these date tags. So just keep that in mind. There are multiple ways that you can limit by date. The most simple one is to use the slider on the side or to use these publication date filters on the side. The other things that I want to point out, and this is a really important one, this text availability right here, where there's an abstract available, free full text or full text. This might be so tempting, like, oh, well, I mean, I obviously want to see the stuff that I can only get PDFs for. I'm going to click full text. Don't do that. That is PubMed limiting to what is available for full text, not the University of Kentucky. PubMed does not recognize immediately what we provide, what we subscribe to as a library, as an academic institution. So if you limit to full text or free full text, it's only going to show what PubMed is providing. And PubMed does have a very large amount of full text. And that's one reason it is such a valuable public database. They have something called PubMed Central. So if you have a study or any kind of research that uses NIH funding, you're obligated to have your manuscript available at some point. There's a certain date limit within PubMed Central, which is a sub database within Medline, or within PubMed specifically, not Medline. So don't click these because you will end up excluding out all the stuff that UK has. You really just have to go through and look yourself and see what we have and what we don't have. So just please never, just don't even be tempted, never use these. There's also limits by article type. If all these, none of these filters, I just want to point this out really quickly, none of these filters are absolutely perfect. So if you're doing a really truly systematic refined review, they're not going to be perfectly refined. The best way to really make sure you're seeing everything is to truly go through all of them. And 119 results is not that much. You can definitely go through these one by one and see what you have. But if you have like 5,000, if you have 10,000 results, and that's possible, you can go in and you can limit to clinical trials, meta-analyses, reviews, systematic reviews, so on and so forth. Don't be tricked to thinking that these are the only ones that are available, the only filters that are available, because there is this additional filters button. We were just talking about article type. You can actually limit by these gazillion different article types. So clinical trial, phase 1, phase 2, 3, 4, protocols, personal narratives, practice guidelines, preprints, all this different stuff. And let's say that I want to click on some of these and limit to that. If I just hit show, all it's going to do is add them under here. It's not going to actually limit to them until you actually click on it. When you click on it, then it'll limit it out. And then you can just clear it, or you can go down here and unselect it to go back to your full results. These are a little risky because if you go in and you add the additional filter for like clinical trial phase 1 or phase 2, well, then you're not going to get anything that's phase 3 or phase 4. It's going to be that narrowed down. So I really recommend, using these only as necessary. Know they're there, maybe experiment with them, but don't rely on them too heavily. And then there's other options. There's humans and animals, other animals besides humans. If you want to look just for animal studies versus just human studies, you can limit by language, male or female, age. Gets really kind of nuanced here, but again, you have to be careful. You don't want to end up limiting yourself if there's an article that covers, juveniles that do not fit neatly into these age limits. So they're helpful, they're there, they can be used, but always be aware of the comparison between the results of when you apply a limit and when you don't. Just be aware of how it is actually changing your results. So going into our actual results themselves, there are actually some multiple display options. So right now, it defaults to 10 articles shown on a page without the abstract showing. Should you want to, you can change the display to show the abstracts. It's going to take a second for it to load. And then, it pops up the retraction article. That's interesting. And then per page, you can have up to 200. So if I want to, I can expand it to 200, and this will take a moment because it'll have to load everything. Now I can see all my 119 results on one page, and that can be useful. Of course, this is going to take a very long time now that I selected it. While this is loading, another thing that you can think about is that, let's say this search is exactly what you want, and you want to go back and you want to make sure that you can see it again at any time. If you log in to PubMed not using your credentials to get to it off campus, but from within it, then you can create and set alerts. So I'm going to go to my login. And this is not super clear cut. So I do absolutely definitely want to demonstrate this. You can get in with your Google account, with your Microsoft account. I highly recommend going to more login options and just searching for, start typing in here, Kentucky. And if I selected University of Kentucky, log in with my credentials. And it'll take a minute. Take a long minute. Okay, I'm just going to go out of it. What it will basically do is I will suddenly now have the power to create alerts. So if I want to save this search and run it, I can hit create alert. If I'm logged in, I have to be logged in, and I can set it so it can run that search every so often and email me the results. So that's a useful thing to remember. If I'm actually looking at my results and I click into one, oh, let's not do that one because it's retracted. If I actually look at one, now it's loading. Sorry about that. If you actually click into one, I apologize that my computer has been so slow. There we go. On the right side, you will see. Sorry, I don't know why that's popping up. On the right side, you will see different ways to access the full text. So this is one that's available with free full text through PubMed Central. So I could just click on that and be able to get to the PDF. Or I could click View Now from UK. See, this is the whole reason that we say that you have to go in through the UK webpage. And if I click on this, it'll either take me directly to the PDF, or it'll take me to within our catalog where I can request it via interlibrary loan. If I go down and read the abstract and everything like that, at the bottom of the page, this is where you find your mesh terms. So as you're finding articles that really fit, that really look like what you're looking for, you might want to go through these and be like, oh, okay, well, cholesterol is another one. This one is actually about the Mediterranean diet. Maybe I want to include that in another search that I'm doing on this topic. So it's important to always look at the mesh terms and just get a sense of how these articles are being indexed, because, you know, it's not perfect. There's actually a person, or I think machines are now doing it now. They're trying to, you know, scan articles and anticipate what mesh terms are to get them done quickly. They might be thinking in a different way than you do. They might include something that makes perfect sense that you didn't even think of. So always going down and looking at your mesh terms, it's helpful to really make sure that you've covered everything that you want to do. And then also, there are similar articles, other things, you know, everything that this article was cited in. So there's just other helpful ways to find articles outside of a direct search, all at the bottom of it. And then going back to our results. Again, just be aware the mesh terms are not always available. But if it's PMC, it's available for free, and that you need to have this view now. If you're ever not accessing this, just try going back to the main, if you're not seeing this, try going back to the main page of PubMed, re-log in, or go back to, I'm sorry, the MCL website, re-log in, try and go back and make sure that this is available. There are other ways to get PDFs that we discuss in the video tips and tricks, EndNote Click, libkeynomad. I really highly recommend you go back and look at that video and find other ways that you can access PDFs both within PubMed and out of it quickly without having to click through multiple links. So keep that in mind. EndNote Click, libkeynomad, go back, look at those. I think that's everything I have for PubMed. Does anybody have any questions?